HOA Karen sent a construction crew onto my private land before breakfast and told them to mark it for a new road, not ask, not inspect, mark it. I was standing by the back fence, coffee still in my hand, watching orange flags go into the same strip of ground where my late wife planted dogwoods with her father then. Marlene Briggs stepped out of her white SUV with a clipboard and said, "The board already approved community access. You have 72 hours to remove anything in the way." Anything in the way meant my fence, my trees, my land. By noon, I had a violation notice, a daily fine threat, and neighbors whispering that I was blocking emergency vehicles. I did not yell. I didn't pull a post out of the ground. I just took pictures of every flag, every paint mark, and one paper the contractor left facing up. Because buried in the county records was one line Marlene never expected me to find. By 7:12 that morning, there were already 6 orange flags in my grass and the words "Access Road" sprayed beside my wife's dogwood trees. I had not received a letter, I had not signed a form. No one had knocked on my door, called my phone, or asked permission to step one boot onto that strip of land. But there it was, marked in white paint like somebody had already decided my property was not mine anymore. My name is Walter McKinney, though most folks in Cedar Hollow call me Walt. I am 66 years old, retired from the utility company, and I have lived in that little brick house outside Franklin County for almost 23 years. I am not a lawyer. I am not a politician. I am not the kind of man who enjoys fighting with neighbors. But I know where my property line is, and I know what my late wife planted on it. That back strip was only 18 feet wide, running behind my fence, where 7 dogwood trees stood in a crooked row. Ellen planted those trees with her father the spring after we bought the place. Every April, when the white blossoms opened, that little strip of land felt like she was still standing there in muddy shoes, laughing, because her dad could not get a single tree straight. So when I saw those orange flags pushed into the grass beside them, I felt something go cold in my chest. At first, I thought maybe a utility crew had marked a buried line that happens sometimes. Gas, fiber, water, you see paint, you make a phone call, and someone explains it. But this was different. The flags were lined up like a road crew had already measured the path. White arrows pointed across my rear strip, cutting straight past the dogwoods and toward the corner of my fence. Then I saw the second spray-painted word "remove." It was painted beside the first fence panel. I set my coffee on the post and walked closer. Behind the lots, a white contractor truck idled near the narrow maintenance lane. A man in a yellow vest stood by the tailgate, pulling more flags from a bucket. He had a rolled-up paper under one arm and a can of marking paint in his hand. I called out, "Excuse me, what are you doing back there?" He looked up fast, like he had hoped nobody would notice, until the job was finished. "Morning," he said. "Just marking the access route." "What access route?" He pointed with the paint can toward my dogwoods. "HOA project. Emergency access road. We were told to mark the rear McKinney line." I looked at the flags, then at the word "remove," then back at him. "This is my property." The man shifted on his boots. He did not seem proud of being there. "I am just following the work order." "Sir, who gave you the work order?" Before he could answer, a white SUV rolled in behind his truck and stopped like it owned the lane. The driver's door opened, and Marlene Briggs stepped out wearing a cream blazer, pearl earrings, and the same tight little smile she wore at every HOA meeting. Marlene had been president of the Cedar Hollow Estates HOA. For almost 3 years she liked titles, printed notices, committees, and telling grown adults what color their mulch should be. She carried a clipboard everywhere as if paper made her taller. She walked toward my fence without one bit of hesitation. "Mr. McKinney," she said. "Good, you are home. That saves me the trouble of leaving the notice." I pointed toward the paint. "Why is the word "remove" sprayed beside my fence?" Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "Because that panel and those trees are obstructing approved community access." Those trees were planted by my wife. Marlene gave a small smile, the kind people use when they want to sound polite while being cruel. "Widowers do get sentimental about landscaping," she said. "But the board cannot redesign a safety road around grief." For a second, I did not speak. The contractor looked down. Marlene looked pleased with herself. I had dealt with rude people before. I had worked storm repairs with customers yelling over power outages, dogs barking, rain coming sideways. I knew how to stay calm when somebody wanted a reaction. But that sentence came close. I looked past her at Ellen S. Dogwoods, then back at the clipboard in her hand. "What road are you talking about?" "A maintenance and emergency access road," she said. "Gravel base, limited use, very reasonable. The board has approved the route." "Across my land? Across the community access strip? There is no community access strip on my deed." She sighed, like I was wasting her valuable morning. "You may feel that way, Mr. McKinney, but your feelings do not override the needs of the neighborhood." "I am not talking about feelings. I am talking about recorded property." Her smile tightened. "The HOA has rights here. Then show me the recorded easement. That was the first time her face changed. Not much, just a blink. A pause, a tiny crack in the rhythm. Then she tapped her clipboard. The board reviewed the neighborhood access map. That is not what I asked. It is the map we have always used. Was it recorded with the county? Her voice sharpened. This is exactly the obstruction we anticipated. The contractor slowly lowered the paint can. Marlene turned slightly, making sure he could still hear her. Mr. McKinney, if emergency vehicles ever cannot reach a family in time, people will remember who blocked the road. There it was. She was not just marking my land. She was trying to make me look like the old man willing to risk somebody else's life over a few trees. I kept my voice level. No one has permission to mark another foot of my property. Marlene lifted her phone and aimed it at me. That is fine, she said loudly. Please document yourself refusing emergency access. I am documenting trespass and unauthorized markings. This is HOA business. Then you should have HOA authorization. You will receive formal notice. I want the section number. You can discuss that at the hearing. I want the recorded easement. You can request documents through the proper process. I am requesting them now. For the first time, Marlene stepped closer to the fence. Her smile disappeared. You have 72 hours to remove anything blocking the access route, she said. After that, the HOA will begin daily fines. How much? $250 per day, plus legal recovery if the board has to involve counsel for refusing to let you build a road across my land, for obstructing approved community access. I looked at the contractor. Do you have a copy of that approval? He hesitated. Marlene snapped her head toward him. You do not need to answer him. That was when I noticed the paper clipped to the board in his hand. The top page had the landscaping company's header. Below it, in bold letters, I could read, Cedar Hollow, HOA Access Road Rear McKinney Line. Under that was a line marked Authorized By. I took out my phone. Marlene saw it immediately. Do not photograph private HOA documents. You brought them onto my property. They are not for you. They mention my name and my land. I raised my phone and took a picture before the contractor turned the clipboard away. Too late. I had it. The signature line at the bottom was not signed by the board. It was signed by Marlene Briggs. She stared at my phone like it had insulted her. You are making this harder than it needs to be, she said. No, I told her. I am making it documented. The contractor capped the paint can. He looked like a man who suddenly wished he had taken a different job that morning. Marlene turned toward him. We are done for now. But before she left, she walked back to the fence and held up a sheet with the HOA letterhead across the top. This is your informal warning, she said. The formal violation notice will be delivered today. If you keep obstructing this project, the fines will start tomorrow morning. My property is not a project. Her smile came back, cold, small, certain. Everything is a project once the board approves it. Then she got into her white SUV and backed out behind the contractor truck, leaving the orange flags in my grass and the word remove drying beside my fence. The yard went quiet again. But it did not feel quiet. It felt like somebody had stepped into a room of my house and written their name on the wall. I stood there for a long time looking at the dogwoods. Then I walked inside, opened the old file cabinet in the laundry room, and pulled out the blue binder Ellen had labeled in her neat handwriting, House Deed, Survey Taxes. I laid it on the kitchen table. At that moment, I still thought Marlene had misunderstood an old neighborhood map. Then I opened the photo of the contractor's work order and zoomed in on the bottom line. Marlene Briggs had not just complained about my land. She had already authorized someone to build a road across it. The violation notice was on my front door before lunch. Not in the mailbox. Not mailed like normal correspondence. Taped right to the glass beside the handle, where every delivery driver, dog walker, and slow-moving neighbor could read the red letters printed across the top. Final notice of community access obstruction. Final notice for something I had first heard about 4 hours earlier. I stood on my porch holding that paper while Mrs. Alvarez walked her little terrier past my driveway. She slowed down just enough to read it. Then she looked at me, looked at the notice, and hurried along like I had been caught doing something shameful. That was how Marlene Briggs worked. She did not just want you fined, she wanted you seen being fined. I took the notice inside and laid it on the kitchen table beside Ellen's blue binder, the same binder my wife had labeled years ago in her neat handwriting, House Deed Survey. Taxes. I read every line twice. According to the HOA, I was blocking a designated emergency and maintenance access corridor. I had 72 hours to remove all personal obstructions, including fencing, plantings, and any unapproved barriers within the marked access path. Plantings. That was the word they used for Ellen's dogwoods. Not trees, not part of my land. Plantings. Then came the money, $250 per day. Administrative recovery fees, legal fees if counsel became necessary, possible lien review if unpaid charges remained on the account. I read that line again. lien review over 18 feet of land that had been mine since the day Ellen and I signed the closing papers. I looked through the kitchen window toward the back fence. The orange flags were still there. The white paint was still drying in the grass. The word remove sat beside my fence panel like a threat. My first instinct was to rip every flag out of the ground and throw them into the road, but I did not. I took pictures of the notice front and back. I photographed the tape on the glass. I laid the paper flat under the kitchen light and took a clear image of every paragraph. Then I opened a folder on my phone and named it Cedar Hollow Access Road. If Marlene wanted a paper trail, I was going to give her one. The first email arrived at 1:06 p.m. It came from the HOA management portal, but the language sounded exactly like Marlene. Mr. McKinney, your refusal to cooperate with the approved emergency access improvement has been documented. Continued obstruction may endanger residents and delay emergency response. The board expects full compliance within the stated deadline. There was no board signature, no attached meeting minutes, no recorded easement, no map with a county stamp, no proof that my land belonged in any access corridor. Just pressure dressed up as authority, I replied with one sentence. Please provide the recorded easement, board minutes approving construction across my parcel, and the covenant section giving the HOA authority over the marked land. I hit send. 9 minutes later, Marlene replied from her personal email. You can make your arguments at the hearing. The board will not be intimidated by paperwork games. Paperwork games. That was what she called deeds, surveys, and recorded land rights. By 3 p.m., the neighborhood Facebook group had a new post. Marlene did not use my name. She did not have to. As many of you know, Cedar Hollow has been working to improve emergency access for the safety of all residents. Unfortunately, one homeowner has chosen to obstruct this effort. Please remember that community safety depends on cooperation, not personal preference. The comments started almost immediately. Safety should come first. Some people only care about themselves. If he cares more about trees than ambulances, maybe he should move. Fine him until he remembers he lives in a community. Someone should call the county before he gets people killed. I sat there with my phone in my hand, reading strangers discuss my wife's trees like they were trash left on a curb. Nobody asked where the property line was. Nobody asked whether the HOA had a recorded easement. Nobody asked why a road could be approved across private land without the owner's signature. Marlene had chosen the word emergency, and once people hear that word, they stop asking where the line is. By evening, cars were slowing down behind my house. A couple of neighbors walked the maintenance lane and looked at my fence like they were inspecting evidence at a crime scene. One of them was Paul Dinner, from 2 streets over. He stood near the orange flags with his hands on his hips, staring at the dogwoods. His wife said something I could not hear. Paul shrugged and said loudly enough for me to catch every word. They are just trees. I opened the back door. Paul. He turned, startled. Oh, Walt, we were just looking at my property? We raised both hands like I was the unreasonable one. Marlene said this was community access. Marlene says a lot of things. His wife tugged his sleeve. Come on, Paul. But Paul looked back at the dogwoods and said, look, nobody wants trouble. But if an ambulance needs to get through, you do not want that on your conscience. That was the second time that day someone tried to put imaginary blood on my hands. I wanted to tell him those trees were planted by Ellen and her father. I wanted to tell him my wife had stood right there, laughing in muddy shoes. I wanted to ask him whether his memories would still be just trees if someone painted remove beside them. But Marlene had already poisoned the words. If I defended the trees, I was selfish. If I defended the fence, I was obstructing. If I defended my deed, I was playing paperwork games, so I only said, ask Marlene for the recorded easement. Paul looked away. That told me he had no idea what an easement was. He just knew what Marlene had told him to be angry about. I went back inside and closed the door. That night I barely slept, not because I thought Marlene was right, because I knew being right was not always enough at the beginning. A person with a title, a mailing list, and a room full of people who do not read documents can do a lot of damage before the truth catches up. At 6:40, the next morning, I heard voices outside. When I opened the front door, Marlene was standing at the end of my driveway with 2 board members and a deputy sheriff. The deputy looked about 35, calm, tired, and not thrilled to be there. His cruiser was parked at the curb with the lights off. That mattered to me. He had not arrived like I was a criminal. He had arrived like a man sent to keep grown adults from making a bad situation worse. Marlene saw me and immediately raised her phone. Mr. McKinney, she said loudly, for everyone's safety, please remain calm. 2 neighbors had already stepped onto their porches. Of course they had. What is this about? I asked. The deputy stepped forward before Marlene could perform any harder. Morning, sir. Deputy Harris, Franklin County Sheriff's Office. We received a call about a dispute involving access to a marked emergency route. Marlene cut in. He threatened contractors yesterday. I looked at her. That was new. Deputy Harris turned to me. Did you threaten anyone, Mr. McKinney? No, sir. I asked them to stop marking my property until they showed legal authority. Marlene kept her phone aimed at my face. He is becoming unpredictable, she said. Yesterday he was hostile, and today he is refusing to cooperate with a safety project. I looked down at the blue binder in my hand. Apparently, asking for a recorded easement now counted as unpredictable. Deputy Harris asked, was anybody touched? No, Marlene said. Was there a weapon? No. But did he threaten violence? Marlene hesitated. That hesitation was the first honest thing she had done all morning. He was aggressive in tone, she said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because if I had been any calmer, I would have been asleep. The deputy wrote something in his notebook. I said, Deputy, would you like to see the notice and the property documents? Yes, sir. Marlene stepped closer. Officer, this is not about his personal documents. The HOA has authority over community access. The deputy did not look impressed. I am going to look at whatever both sides want to show me. I did not invite him inside. I stayed on the porch and brought out L&S blue binder, the violation notice, the printed email, and the photo of the contractor's work order on my phone. Marlene stood in the driveway with her arms crossed. The two board members stayed behind her. One was a younger man named Kevin, with sunglasses pushed onto his head. The other was Janet Mills, who had always been polite to me at annual meetings, but now looked like she wanted to disappear into the sidewalk. I opened the binder to the deed summary page. This parcel is mine, I said. The marked strip is behind my fence inside my boundary. I asked for a recorded easement yesterday. I have not received one. Marlene held up a photocopy. We have the neighborhood access map. Deputy Harris glanced at it. Is that recorded with the county? Marlene's jaw tightened. It is part of the HOA planning documents. That is not what I asked. I almost looked at her then, because it was the same question I had asked. The deputy took the photocopy from Marlene and studied it for a few seconds. There was no county stamp, no book number, no page number, no surveyor seal, just a faded map with thick lines drawn behind several lots and the words, proposed access handwritten across the top. Proposed. I saw Deputy Harris notice that word. Marlene spoke quickly. That map has been in our records for years. Everyone understands that rear area is intended for access. Intended by who? I asked. She snapped her eyes toward me. The community, the county records community, or the Facebook community. Kevin muttered. Come on, Walt. I turned to him. Kevin, did you vote to build a road across my land? He opened his mouth. Marlene answered for him. The board discussed this. That was not my question. Kevin looked down at the driveway. Janet Mills looked at Marlene for 1 second. Nobody said anything. That silence was the first crack in Marlene's performance. Deputy Harris handed the map back to her. Ma'am, based on what I am seeing right now, I am not ordering Mr. McKinney to remove anything. This appears to be a civil property dispute. Marlene's face hardened. So the sheriff's office will not protect emergency access. I am saying I do not enforce HOA fines, he said, and I do not authorize construction on private property without clear legal documentation or a court order. Her phone was still recording, but now it was recording the wrong thing. Deputy Harris turned to me. Mr. McKinney, do not touch them. Do not block vehicles physically, and keep documenting. If someone comes onto your land after you have clearly denied permission, call us and we will make a report. I understand. Then he looked back at Marlene. Ma'am, I would strongly suggest nobody remove trees, fencing or soil until your board confirms exactly what rights it has. Marlene smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Thank you, Deputy. We will handle this through the HOA process. The way she said process made it sound less like paperwork and more like punishment. After the deputy left, Marlene walked halfway up my driveway. I stayed on the porch. You embarrassed yourself, she said quietly. No, Marlene. I asked for documents. You think a binder makes you untouchable? I think recorded land rights matter. You have no idea how expensive this can get. There it was again, not law, not proof cost. That was her weapon now. She could not show me an easement. So she wanted me afraid of invoices, attorneys, letters, and neighbors whispering at mailboxes. Then she stepped back and raised her voice so the board members and nearby neighbors could hear. Mr. McKinney, the hearing will be Friday at 6. If you refuse to comply before then, the board will review fines, legal recovery, and continued obstruction of a safety project. She turned to Janet. Make sure his refusal is in the record. Janet gave a small nod, but her face was pale. By noon, a second notice appeared in my email. Notice of hearing. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. The message said, I had the right to appear before the board and explain why I should not be fined for obstructing community access. It also said failure to attend would be considered acceptance of the violation. At the bottom, attached as evidence, was Marlene's access map. The same photocopy, the same thick line, the same handwritten word. Proposed. I printed the email. I printed her personal reply. I printed the Facebook post. I printed the comments about ambulances, selfishness, and finding me until I remembered I lived in a community. Then I went back outside and photographed the flags again from 3 angles, making sure my fence, the dogwoods, and the painted word remove were all visible in the same frame. While I was out there, the contractor from the day before pulled up slowly in his white truck. He did not get out at first. Then he rolled down his window. Mr. McKinney? Yes. He glanced toward the houses behind us, then lowered his voice. I am not here to mark anything. I just wanted to tell you something. I walked closer but kept a few feet between us. He held up both hands. I do not want to be in the middle of this. Then why are you here? He looked embarrassed. Because yesterday, when Mrs. Briggs called our office, she told us the property owner had already been notified and the HOA had written access approval. She told you I had been notified? Yes, sir. I had not. I figured that out. He reached into his passenger seat and pulled out a folded copy of the work order. I cannot give you company records, he said, but I can tell you what mine says. He unfolded it against the steering wheel. Under special instructions, one sentence had been typed in small letters. Homeowner may object. HOA. President states access rights confirmed. Proceed with marking only. I read it twice. Homeowner may object. That meant Marlene knew I might object before anyone set foot near LNS trees. She knew there was a problem. She sent them anyway. Who signed it? I asked. He looked down. You already saw that part. Marlene Briggs. Not the board. Not the county. Not a court. Marlene Briggs. The contractor folded the paper again. I told my boss we should not come back until someone shows us something recorded. Thank you, I said. He gave a quick nod and drove away. I stood there with the wind moving through LNS dogwoods, hearing Marlene's words from the day before. The board cannot redesign a safety road around grief. Maybe not, but I had a feeling the county did not design property lines around Marlene Briggs. That afternoon, I called the Franklin County Records Office. A woman answered in a calm voice that sounded like she had spent 20 years helping angry landowners find the right book and page. I gave her my parcel number from the tax bill. There was a pause while she typed. Then she said, Mr. McKinney, I can pull your deed, the subdivision plat, and any recorded easements tied to your parcel. Would you like certified copies? I looked at the orange flags through the kitchen window. Yes, ma'am, I said. I would, she asked. Are you looking for anything specific? I picked up Marlene's photocopied map and stared at the word proposed. Yes, I said. I need to know whether Cedar Hollow HO has any recorded access easement across the rear 18 feet of my property. The clerk went quiet for a few seconds. I heard keys clicking. Then she said something careful, something professional, something that made me sit down at the kitchen table and reach for a pen. Mr. McKinney, she said, I do see an easement in that subdivision, but from what I am seeing here, it may not be where your HOA thinks it is. That was when I stopped treating it like a neighborhood disagreement. Because the map Marlene had been waving around had one problem: it was not the county record. I was at the Franklin County Records Office the next morning, before they unlocked the front doors. The building was not impressive. Red brick, old glass, a faded county seal above the entrance. The kind of place most people drive past 100 times without thinking twice. But if you have ever owned land, really owned it, then you know something. The truth about property is not kept in Facebook comments. It is not kept on HOA letterhead. It is not kept in Marlene Briggs' clipboard. It is kept in quiet rooms like that one, inside books, plats, file numbers, stamps, and signatures people only care about when someone tries to take what belongs to them. I walked in carrying Ellen's blue binder under one arm. A woman at the counter looked up over her glasses. Walter McKinney? Yes, ma'am, I'm Denise. We spoke yesterday. Her voice was the same calm voice from the phone. Not warm exactly, but steady, the voice of someone who had seen every kind of property fight. Siblings over inheritance, builders over setbacks, neighbors over fences, and probably more than a few HOA presidents who thought a committee title could bend a deed. Denise tapped a stack of papers beside her keyboard. I pulled your parcel, the Cedar Hollow subdivision plat, and the recorded easement documents tied to that section. I set my binder carefully on the counter. Before you show me anything, I said, I want to be clear, I am not asking you to give legal advice. She smiled a little. Good, because I don't. I just need to know what the county records show that I can do. She turned the first page around. It was the recorded subdivision plat for Cedar Hollow Estates, not Marlene's faded photocopy, not the planning sketch with thick marker lines. This one had a county recording stamp, a book and page number, a surveyor seal, and clean boundary lines drawn with the kind of precision that does not care about opinions. Denise pointed with the end of a pen. Here is your parcel. Lot 18. I leaned over the counter. There it was, my house, my rear boundary, the narrow strip behind my fence. Here is the common drainage area, she said, moving the pen to the land behind several lots. And here is the recorded maintenance easement. I followed the line. It did run behind part of the neighborhood. That much was true. For one cold second, I felt my stomach tighten. Then Denise moved the pen again. But it stops here. The pen rested on a point that was not on my land, not even touching it. How far is that from my rear corner? I asked. She checked a note she had written on a yellow sticky pad. According to the recorded plat, approximately 42 feet before your property line. 42 feet. I looked at the map again. Marlene's whole argument, all the red letter notices, all the talk about emergency access, all the neighbors whispering about ambulances, all of it depended on a line that stopped 42 feet before it reached me. I pulled out Marlene's photocopied access map and placed it beside the county plat. The difference was obvious. On the county plat, the easement ended before Lot 18 on Marlene's map. A thick black line had been drawn past the stop point, curving across the rear of my property, like someone had simply continued it by hand. Denise looked at the two maps but did not say what I was thinking. County employees are careful that way, so I said it for myself. This one is recorded, yes, and this one is not. I do not see a recording stamp, book number, page number, instrument number, or surveyor's seal on that copy. That phrase caught my ear. Instrument number? Denise nodded. Every recorded document has identifying information. Book and page, instrument number, recording date. Something that lets the county trace it back to the official record. I took out a pen. Would the HOA's access right need one of those? Again, she chose her words carefully. If the HOA is claiming a recorded easement across your parcel, they should be able to identify the recorded instrument that created it. I wrote it down. Recorded instrument number. That was the phrase Marlene had avoided for 2 days. Not safety, not community, not proposed access. Recorded instrument number. Could an HOA use an unrecorded planning map to build a road across my parcel? I asked. Denise folded her hands on the counter. That is a legal question, but I can tell you what is recorded. I do not see any recorded road easement across Lot 18. I felt the first real breath I had taken in 2 days. Not relief. Not yet. Relief comes when the other side stops. This was something different. This was footing. I asked for certified copies of everything: my deed, the subdivision plat, the recorded easement, the parcel map. The clerk stamped each packet, signed where she needed to sign, and slid them into a large manila envelope. Before I left, she paused. Mr. McKinney? Yes? If there is going to be a board hearing, take certified copies, not screenshots, not printouts, certified. I plan to. She glanced at the envelope and asked them for the instrument number. I looked at her. She did not smile this time. Not just the map, she said. Not just the policy. Not just someone saying everybody knew. Ask for the recorded instrument number. I nodded slowly. Yes, ma, am. And you may want a current surveyor to mark your rear boundary before anybody else puts paint in your grass. That was the next stop. There was a surveyor's office 6 miles away, between a tire shop and a small Baptist church. The sign out front said Hollis Land Surveying, S. 1989. Inside, a man named Ray Hollis sat behind a desk covered in rolled plats, field notebooks, and coffee cups that looked older than some houses. He was in his early 70s, with sun-browned hands and the kind of eyes that had spent a lifetime looking at fence lines and knowing when someone was lying about them. I showed him the county plat, my deed, and photos of the orange flags. He studied them for a while without saying much. Then he leaned back. Who painted "Remove" beside your fence? HOA president. He looked at the photo again. Confident woman. That is one word for her. He gave a short laugh through his nose. Did she show you a recorded easement? No, then she should have kept the paint in the can. Ray pulled an older file from a cabinet after I gave him my address. It turned out his office had surveyed 2 neighboring parcels in Cedar Hollow. Years earlier, I remember this subdivision, he said. Developer put the drainage easement in, but the access road was discussed and never finalized on that rear stretch. You remember that? I remember, because people argued about it then, too. He spread a large copy of the plat across his desk and placed a ruler against the rear line. Your wife's dogwoods, he said, pointing to the photo, are inside your parcel if these old markers are still where they should be. The fence looks set slightly inside the line, not outside it. I stared at him. My fence is inside my own line? Looks like it. Which means they were not even marking the edge. They were marking into your land. That sentence hit harder than I expected, because Marlene had not just mistaken the boundary. She had gone past it. Ray agreed to come out that afternoon. At 2:15, his truck pulled into my driveway with tripods, stakes, and equipment in the bed. I watched him work quietly behind the fence while a few neighbors pretended not to watch from windows. Ray found the first iron pin near the back corner, under a layer of dirt and old grass. Then the second. Then he stretched the line. By the time he finished, he placed 2 small survey flags of his own along the actual rear boundary. They were not where Marlene's flags were. Marlene's flags were inside my property by almost 8 feet at the widest point. 8 feet, enough to take the dogwoods, enough to cut through the corner of my fence, enough to turn Ellen's little strip of land into gravel. Ray wrote preliminary notes on a clipboard. "I'll prepare a letter," he said. "Not a full boundary dispute report unless you need it, but enough to state what I found today and reference the recorded plat. Can I use it at the hearing? You can say, a licensed surveyor came out and marked the boundary. I'll have the letter ready tomorrow." As he packed up, a woman's voice called from the other side of the fence. "Walt?" I turned. Janet Mills was standing near the maintenance lane, the same board member who had looked pale in my driveway while Marlene performed for the deputy. She had no clipboard, no phone held up, no Marlene beside her, just a folded paper in her hand, and the look of someone who had spent the morning deciding whether fear was still worth it. "Can we talk?" she asked. I did not invite her inside. I had learned that much, but I walked to the fence. Ray was still nearby loading equipment. That made me feel better. Janet looked toward the houses behind her. "I should not be here," she said. "Then why are you?" She swallowed. "Because you asked Kevin yesterday if the board voted to build a road across your land. I remember we did not." There it was. Not a suspicion, not a guess, a board member saying the words out loud. I kept my voice calm. "What did you vote on?" Janet unfolded the paper. "We had a meeting in March. Marlene put rear access improvement on the agenda. The discussion was about whether it was worth asking an engineer to look at possible emergency routes. That was it. No construction? No. No authorization to enter my property? No. No vote to remove my fence? No. No vote to remove the dogwoods?" She looked down. "No. No vote to fine me? The fines were not voted on by the full board." Janet said quietly. "Marlene said emergency authority allowed her to issue the notice first and let the board ratify it later. Is that in your bylaws?" Janet pressed her lips together. "I do not think so. That was careful language, but careful language can still tell the truth." She handed me the folded paper through the fence. It was a copy of the March meeting minutes, not the version Marlene had mentioned. This one showed the agenda item, the discussion, and the actual motion. Motion: obtain preliminary engineering opinion regarding possible emergency access routes. No construction approval. No vote to enter private land. No vote to remove fences. No vote to remove trees. No vote to fine Walter McKinney. At the bottom there was another problem. Only 3 board members had attended that meeting. The bylaws required 4 for quorum. "Janet," I said, "why are you giving me this?" Her eyes watered a little, though she fought it. "Because my husband told me last night that if someone tried to paint remove beside the maple tree we planted for our son, I would never forgive myself for staying quiet for a moment." Neither of us spoke. Then she added, "Marlene told us the land was covered by an old access easement. She said you knew about it and were just being difficult. I did not know anything until flags were in my grass. I believe that now. Does Marlene know you are giving me this?" Janet looked toward the lane again. "No. And I would rather she not find out from you. She will find out at the hearing." Janet nodded slowly. "I know." She walked away before I could say thank you, Ray. Hollis watched her go. "Board member?" he asked. "Yes, looks like your road just lost a wheel." I almost smiled. Almost. But then my phone buzzed. Another email. This one came from the HOA management portal. Notice of continuing noncompliance. Marlene had attached 3 new photos. One showed my fence. One showed the dogwoods. One showed Ray Hollis standing beside his survey equipment. The message read, "Mr. McKinney, the board has been informed that you invited an outside contractor to interfere with the approved access corridor. Any attempt to alter, remove, or dispute HOA markings before the hearing may be considered further obstruction." I read that sentence twice. Ray had not touched her flags. He had not removed her paint. He had not blocked anyone. He had identified my boundary. And Marlene was calling that interference. 10 minutes later, a second email arrived. This one was shorter. "Due to continued obstruction, the board reserves the right to authorize removal of unauthorized barriers within the marked access corridor if compliance is not achieved before Friday's hearing." I looked out the kitchen window. The dogwoods moved gently in the wind. Unauthorized barriers. That meant my fence. That meant Elena's trees. That meant Marlene was still trying to make the hearing feel like a courtesy, not a decision. For the first time, I wondered if she might try to send a crew before Friday night and ask questions later. That was when I understood something about people like her. They do not just want control over land, they want control over the facts. If a map helps them, they wave it in public. If a survey hurts them, they call it interference. If a tree has a story, they call it a barrier. I forwarded both emails to myself, printed them inside, and added them to the growing stack. Then I called the HOA management company. A woman named April answered. "Well, Cedar Hollow Management Office. This is April. My name is Walter McKinney. I need a copy of the governing documents, the fine schedule, the appeal procedures, and any board authorization related to the rear access road. There was a pause. Are you the homeowner involved in the access hearing? I am. Another pause. Then her voice dropped slightly. Mr. McKinney, I can send the governing documents and fine schedule. For board authorization, I would have to check the file. Please do. I heard typing, then silence, then more typing. That is strange, she said. What is? I see a project folder, but I do not see a signed board resolution authorizing construction. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you see? A preliminary vendor inquiry, a planning map, some email correspondence. But I do not see a motion passed for construction, and I do not see anything authorizing entry onto your parcel. Can you email that to me? I can email the records request response. I have to be careful with internal notes. I understand. Then she said something that made me stop walking. Mr. McKinney, between us, you should ask at the hearing who gave the contractor permission to proceed. I know who signed the work order. April went quiet. Then she said, then you should ask why the board did not. Before she hung up, she added one more thing and asked for the recorded instrument number. I looked down at the note I had already written from Denise at the county office. You are the second person to tell me that today. Then listen to both of us, April said, because an HOA policy is not the same thing as a recorded property right. By Thursday afternoon, my kitchen table no longer looked like a place for meals. It looked like a case file. On the left, I stacked Marlene's papers, the final notice, the hearing notice, the Facebook post, the comments calling me selfish, the unrecorded access map, the email calling my request for documents paperwork games, the notice accusing me of interfering because I hired a surveyor, the warning about removing unauthorized barriers. Before the hearing on the right, I stacked the records, certified deed, certified subdivision plat, recorded easement, parcel map, surveyor letter pending March meeting minutes from Janet. Oh, a fine schedule, April S. response showing no signed construction authorization in the file, and in the middle, I placed the photo from my phone. The contractor's work order, Cedar Hollow HOA access road rear McKinney line, authorized by Marlene Briggs. I looked at those stacks for a long time. One pile had stamps, signatures, book numbers, and witnesses. The other pile had Marlene as confidence. For the first time since I saw the orange flags, I felt the balance shift, not because the fight was over, because now I knew exactly where the weak spot was. Marlene had made everyone believe this was about safety. It was not, it was about authority. She claimed the HOA had access rights where the county recorded none, while she claimed the board approved construction when the minutes showed no valid vote. She claimed I was obstructing a project when the project itself had no proper authorization. And she claimed I was being emotional about trees, when she knew those trees stood on land she had no recorded right to touch. That night, I wrote 3 questions on a yellow legal pad. What county book, page, or instrument number gives the HOA access across Lot 18? What board vote authorized entry, marking, fines, or removal on my property? Who signed the contractor order before either one existed? I read the questions out loud in the empty kitchen. If Marlene could answer those 3 questions, she might survive the hearing. If she could not, the road was not the only thing about to collapse. Later that evening, I walked outside to the dogwoods. The orange HOA flags were still there, but Rhea's boundary markers stood beyond them like quiet little witnesses. I did not move anything. I did not pull a flag. I did not scrape the paint. I just stood there and let the cameras record the yard exactly as Marlene had left it. Then I noticed my side gate camera blinking. I had almost forgotten about it. The little camera faced the back corner of the fence, mostly to catch deer and the occasional delivery driver who used the wrong path. I opened the app and scrolled back to the morning. Marlene and the contractor first arrived. There was the white truck. There was Marlene SUV. There was the contractor stepping out with the paint can. And then, clear enough to hear through the open gate, Marlene's voice came through the tiny speaker. Just mark it now, she said. He'll back down once the fines start. I sat down on the patio step. I played it again and again. Not because I needed to hear it, because I knew the board would, by the time the hearing notice reminded me to appear Friday at 6. Marlene thought I was coming to ask for mercy. I was not. I was coming with the deed, the plat, the surveyor, the minutes, the management response, the instrument number question, and the sentence she never thought my camera would catch. Friday, at 6 o'clock, the Cedar Hollow Community Center parking lot was almost full. That was how I knew Marlene had been working the room before I ever walked into it. Most HOA hearings did not pull 40 people on a Friday evening. Most residents had better things to do than sit under fluorescent lights and listen to neighbors argue about fence panels. But this was not being sold as a fence issue. Marlene had sold it as emergency access, community safety. One stubborn homeowner putting everyone else at risk. So people came. Not because they knew the facts, Because they thought they already knew the villain. I sat in my truck for a moment, with the engine off and Ellen's blue binder on the passenger seat. Beside it was the manila envelope from Franklin County, Ray Hollick's surveyor letter. The HOA management response April had sent that afternoon, Janet's copy of the March minutes, and my yellow legal pad. At the top of that pad were 3 questions, not arguments. Questions. What recorded instrument gives the HOA access across Lot 18? What valid board vote authorized marking, fines, or removal? Who signed the contractor order before either one existed? I read them once. Then I picked up the binder and went inside. The meeting room had folding chairs in tight rows. A crooked Cedar Hollow HOA banner hung behind the board table. Marlene sat in the center seat wearing her cream blazer, pearl earrings, and the same controlled smile she wore the morning she told a contractor to mark my land. Kevin sat to her right. Janet sat 2 chairs down, pale but present. Paul Denner was in the 3rd row. Mrs. Alvarez sat near the aisle. A few neighbors from the Facebook comments whispered when they saw me. One woman said, "That's him. Not Walt, not Mr. McKinney, him." Marlene tapped the microphone. "This special hearing of the Cedar Hollow Estates Board is now called to order," she said. "We are here to address continued obstruction of a board-approved emergency access improvement by Lot 18 owner Walter McKinney." She looked at the audience when she said it. Not at me. That was the trick. She was not opening a hearing. She was finishing the story she had already been telling. "The board takes no pleasure in enforcement," Marlene continued. "But when one homeowner's personal preference interferes with the safety of the entire community, we have an obligation to act." A few people nodded. I set the blue binder on my lap and stayed quiet. Marlene lifted a packet of papers. "Mr. McKinney was notified that fencing and plantings are obstructing a designated emergency access corridor. Instead of cooperating, he hired an outside contractor to dispute HOA markings. He challenged long-standing access documents and refused to correct the obstruction. Ray Hollis, the licensed surveyor, was sitting 2 rows behind me. He leaned forward slightly when she called him an outside contractor." Marlene went on. "Tonight, Mr. McKinney may explain why fines should not continue and why the board should not authorize removal of the obstruction at owner expense." Owner expense. That phrase did exactly what she wanted. It made people look at me like I had forced the community to spend money. Then she turned toward me. "Mr. McKinney, you may speak for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, for 2 days of public accusations, for threats against my fence, for the dogwoods Ellen planted, for a road that had already been painted into my grass." I stood slowly. "I will need enough time to respond to the evidence being used against me," I said. Marlene smiled. "The hearing rules allow 5 minutes. I opened the binder. Well, Section 7.4 of your own hearing procedure says a homeowner must be given reasonable time to respond to evidence and proposed enforcement. Since the board is discussing fines, removal, and cost recovery, 5 minutes is not reasonable." The room shifted. Not loudly, just enough. Marlene had expected anger. She had not expected section numbers. Kevin leaned toward her and whispered something. Marlene's smile tightened. 10 minutes, she said. "That will be enough." I walked to the small speaker table and placed the yellow legal pad in front of me. "I am not here to argue about whether emergency access matters," I said. "Of course it does. I am here to ask whether the HOA has the legal authority to put that access road across my private land that changed the temperature of the room because it took away Marlene's favorite shield, safety." I held up the violation notice. This was taped to my door less than 4 hours after I first learned about the project. It says final notice. There was no first notice. A few people murmured. I placed it down and moved on. No speech, no drama, just the next piece. "This is the map the HOA attached to my hearing notice." I held up Marlene's photocopied access map. "This map has no county recording stamp, no book and page, no instrument number, and no surveyor seal." Then I placed the certified county plat beside it. "This is the Franklin County recorded plat." I did not explain every line again. I had done that work already in my kitchen, at the county office, with the surveyor, and with the documents. Tonight was not about reading the whole record aloud. Tonight was about making one thing impossible to dodge. I pointed to the certified plat. "The recorded easement stops before Lot 18. The HOA map continues the line across my property. The county record does not." The room got quiet. Marlene immediately said, "That is Mr. McKinney's interpretation." I looked down at the first question on my legal pad. "Then this should be easy to correct." I turned toward the board table. "What recorded instrument gives the HOA access across Lot 18? Marlene looked at her packet. "The access route has been understood for years." That was not my question. She lifted her chin. "The neighborhood planning documents identify that rear corridor." That was not my question either. I repeated it slower. "What recorded instrument gives the HOA access across Lot 18? For the first time that night, Marlene did not have a sentence ready. Kevin rubbed one hand across his mouth. Janet stared at the table. Mrs. Alvarez leaned slightly forward. Marlene finally said, "Council can provide additional documentation after review." "So tonight," I said, "the board is considering fines and removal on my land, but cannot identify the recorded document giving it access to my land." Nobody spoke. That was the first crack. I moved to the next document. This is a letter from Ray Hollis, licensed surveyor. He located the rear boundary using the recorded plat and existing markers. Ray stood just enough to be seen. "For the record," he said, "I am not an outside contractor interfering with HOA work. I am a licensed surveyor. I did not remove HOA flags. I did not alter markings. I identified the boundary." Marlene said sharply, "This is not your hearing, Mr. Hollis." Ray sat back down, but he had already done what mattered. He had corrected the label she put on him. I read only one line from his letter. "The orange HOA access flags appear to be placed inside Lot 18 by approximately 8 feet at the widest point." A woman near the aisle whispered, "Inside his property?" I looked toward her. "Yes, inside my property." That was the second crack, because once people heard that, the issue was no longer whether I was blocking a road. The issue was why the HOA had marked a road inside land it did not own. Marlene leaned into her microphone. "Mr. McKinney keeps avoiding the purpose of this project." "No," I said. "I am asking whether a purpose gives the HOA authority it does not have." That sentence landed. I saw Paul Denner uncross his arms. I moved to the March minutes. "My second question is about board approval." Marlene's face changed before I said another word. She knew where this was going. "You told residents this was board approved," I said, "so I asked for the vote." I held up Janet's minutes. The motion in March was to obtain a preliminary engineering opinion regarding possible emergency access routes. It was not a motion to construct. It was not a motion to enter Lot 18. It was not a motion to remove fencing or trees. It was not a motion to fine me. Kevin shifted in his chair, I continued, "and the minutes show only 3 board members present. The bylaws require 4 for quorum." The word quorum moved through the room like a spark. Marlene reached for her microphone. "Those minutes are incomplete." Janet's voice came from the board table. "No, Marlene. They are not." Every head turned. Janet looked scared, but she did not look away. "I took those minutes," she said. "We discussed asking an engineer for options. We did not authorize construction across Mr. McKinney's property. We did not authorize a contractor to mark his land, and we did not vote to fine him." Marlene stared at her. "Janet, this is not helpful." Janet swallowed. "It is true." The room changed then. For 2 days, Marlene had controlled the story. Now her own board member had broken the script. I placed April's management response on the table this afternoon. The management company responded to my records request. They found a project folder, a planning map, vendor correspondence, and hearing documents. I looked at the board table. They did not find a signed board resolution authorizing construction or entry onto my parcel. Kevin looked down. Marlene's lips pressed into a thin line. What the room did not know yet was that April had also forwarded my records request and Marlene's removal warning to HOA Council after she noticed the missing resolution. I did not know whether Council would respond tonight, tomorrow, or next week, but I knew the board table looked less confident than it had 5 minutes ago. I moved to the final printed page. "This is the contractor's work order." Marlene stood halfway. "That is not an official HOA record." It was official enough to send a contractor to my fence line. I read the header, "Cedar Hollow HOA Access Road Rear McKinney Line," then the special instruction. "Homeowner may object. HOA President states access rights confirmed. Proceed with marking only." People started whispering again. "Homeowner may object." That phrase did damage, because it showed she knew there was a problem before the flags went into my grass. I turned the page toward the board. "Authorized by Marlene Briggs, Mrs. Alvarez whispered. She signed it herself. Marlene heard that. Her face flushed. "This is being twisted," she said. "I acted in good faith to protect this community." I looked at my third question. Who signed the contractor order before a recorded access document or valid board vote existed? She did not answer, so I answered for her. "You did." Marlene pointed at me. "You care more about a few trees than the safety of your neighbors." I let that sit for a second. Then I said, "My wife planted those trees with her father, but that is not why you are wrong." The room went still. "You are wrong because grief does not erase a deed, and neither does an HOA title." No one whispered after that. I took out my phone. "There is one more item." Marlene's eyes locked on the screen. I saw the moment she started remembering the morning at my fence. "This is from my side gate camera," I said. It recorded the contractor arriving to mark the route. Marlene snapped, "You recorded me without permission?" A few people looked at her. I kept my voice level. "You were standing on my property, directing a contractor toward my fence." She turned toward Kevin. "This is inappropriate." Kevin looked exhausted. "Let him play it." Marlene glared at him, but he did not take it back. I pressed play. The room heard wind first, then a truck door, then Marlene's voice, clear enough that nobody had to ask who it was. Just mark it now, she said. He'll back down once the fines start. I stopped the video. I did not need to play more. Sometimes one sentence is enough for 2 seconds. Nobody moved. Ray Hollis stared at the floor. Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth. Paul Denner looked at Marlene, then down at his shoes. Janet closed her eyes. Marlene leaned into the microphone. That was taken out of context. I nodded once. Then give us the context. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said the context is that Mr. McKinney has resisted from the beginning. No, Janet said. Marlene turned toward her. Janet sat straighter. The context is that we had not authorized this. Kevin raised his hand slightly. I did not vote to enter Walt's property either. That was when the room finally broke. Not into chaos, into questions. Then why did the Facebook post say it was approved? Who authorized the fines? Can the HOA threaten a lien without a vote? Did this happen with other violations? That last question changed everything. Because suddenly it was no longer just my dogwoods. It was everyone's mailbox notice, everyone's late fee, everyone's warning letter, everyone's appeal, hearing where they had been told the board had already decided. Marlene tapped the microphone. Order. This hearing is not about past grievances. No, I said. It is about authority. The room quieted enough for me to finish. I am asking the board to cancel the violation, withdraw all fines, remove the access markings from my property, and state in writing that Cedar Hollow HOA has no recorded road easement across Lot 18 unless it can produce one by book, page, or instrument number. I looked at Marlene, and I am asking that no one step onto my property again without written legal authority. Before Marlene could answer, the side door opened. A man in a Navy suit stepped in carrying a leather folder. Thomas Keene, the HOA attorney. I recognized him from an annual meeting years earlier. Marlene froze. That told me she had not invited him. Thomas walked to the front slowly. Not dramatic, not angry, which somehow made the room quieter. I apologize for interrupting, he said. The management company forwarded several documents to my office this afternoon, including the records request response, the proposed removal warning, and the work order. Marlene said, Thomas, this is an internal hearing. I understand, he said. That is why I am going to be brief. He opened the folder. Based on what I have reviewed so far, I have not seen a recorded road easement across Lot 18. I have not seen a signed board resolution authorizing construction or entry onto Mr. McKinney's parcel. I have not seen a valid vote approving fines tied to obstruction of this access project. Marlene's face tightened. Thomas continued. I recommend the board suspend enforcement immediately, withdraw any threatened removal action, preserve all records related to this project, and consult counsel before making any further claim regarding Mr. McKinney's property. Someone in the back whispered, preserve records? Marlene looked furious. Are you saying he is right? Thomas looked at her. I am saying the HOA should not attempt to build, mark, grade, remove trees, remove fencing, or assess fines on private property without recorded rights and proper board authorization. That was the cleanest sentence of the night. No insult, no performance. Just the sentence Marlene had spent 3 days avoiding. Kevin reached for his microphone. I move that all fines and enforcement related to Lot 18 access obstruction be suspended pending legal review. Janet said second. Marlene turned sharply. We are not prepared to vote. Kevin looked at her. Second has been made. The vote was quick. Kevin voted yes. Janet voted yes. Another board member voted yes. Marlene did not raise her hand. It did not matter. The motion carried for a moment. I just stood there beside the speaker table. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I looked at the binder, the work order, the certified plat, and the room full of people who had spent 2 days believing I was blocking safety when all I had asked for was proof. Then Paul Denner stood. He looked uncomfortable, stiff, like the apology had to fight its way out of him. Walt, he said, I should not have said what I said about your trees. I nodded. Once that was all I could manage. Marlene gathered her papers with shaking hands, but Thomas Keene was not done. One more matter, he said. Until legal review is complete, I recommend preserving all emails, vendor communications, hearing notices, financial approvals, board messages, and records related to the access project. Preserving records. This time, everyone understood what that meant. Marlene stopped with one hand on her clipboard. Janet looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at the work order still lying on the table, and for the first time all night, the room was no longer looking at me. They were looking at Marlene. She had walked into that hearing as the HOA president defending a safety project. But by the time my camera clip finished playing, even her own board would not stand behind the road she had already tried to put through my land. By Monday morning, every fine against me was gone. Not reduced, not delayed, not pending review. Gone. At 8:17 a.m. the first email arrived from the Cedar Hollow Management Company, Mr. McKinney. Following Friday a special hearing and subsequent legal review, all notices, fines, penalties, and threatened enforcement actions related to the alleged Lot 18 access obstruction have been withdrawn. There will be no lien review. There will be no daily fine. There will be no removal action. The Cedar Hollow Estates HOA will not enter, mark grade, remove alter, or claim any portion of Lot 18 without recorded legal authority and written notice. I sat at my kitchen table and read that last sentence 3 times. Lot 18, not community access, not emergency corridor, not proposed route. Lot 18, my land had its name back. For 3 days, Marlene had tried to turn it into something else with orange flags, white paint notices, Facebook posts, and the kind of voice people use when they think nobody will ask for records. But now the written answer was sitting in front of me. The HOA would not touch my property. The second email came 16 minutes later. This one was from Thomas Keene, the HOA attorney. It was short, careful, and exactly the kind of letter lawyers write when everyone in the room knows something went too far, but no one wants to use the wrong word, Mr. McKinney. On behalf of Cedar Hollow Estates HOA, please accept this written confirmation that the access enforcement action against Lot 18 has been withdrawn. The association will reimburse reasonable documented expenses incurred for certified county records, surveyor review, and legal consultation related to this matter. I leaned back in my chair. Reasonable documented expenses. That meant Ray Hollis. That meant the certified records. That meant the half-hour phone consultation I had with a property attorney after Friday's meeting, who mostly said, do not sign anything and do not let anyone remove anything. It was not a fortune. It was not some $1 million courtroom victory, but it mattered, because Marlene had tried to make defending my own land expensive enough that I would give up. Now the bill was going back to the people who created the problem. The apology came 2 days later. It was only 3 sentences, written by the attorney, but it used the words I needed to see. The association regrets the unauthorized markings placed on Lot 18. Unauthorized, not misunderstood, not disputed, not unfortunate, unauthorized. I sat there with that letter in my hand, and for a moment I did not think about Marlene's clipboard or the Facebook comments, or the way people had looked at me like I was blocking ambulances. I thought about the word remove painted beside L&S dogwoods. I thought about standing in my own yard, watching a contractor mark my wife's trees like they were trash to be cleared. And then I looked back at the apology. 3 sentences were not enough to undo that feeling, but they were enough to prove I had not imagined it. They had been wrong, and now they had to write it down. At 10:30, Ray Hollis called. I got a message from the HOA attorney, he said. I did too, Ray chuckled. That was fast. Good fast or nervous fast? Lawyer fast, he said. That means somebody finally understood the difference between a planning sketch and a recorded easement. I almost smiled. Almost, then he said. I can come by this afternoon and remove my temporary markers after I place the permanent reference stakes inside your line. Not outside? No, Ray said. Inside your land, your side, your record. That afternoon, Ray came back with 2 small brass survey markers and a short written boundary note. He did not make a show of it. He did not grandstand. He just measured. He checked, marked, and wrote. A few neighbors watched from porches. Nobody said much. That was fine with me. For once, silence felt better than whispers. When Ray finished, he stood near the dogwoods and looked at the faded white paint still visible in the grass. County record did its job, he said. I looked at the trees. No, I said. People did you. Denies Janet April. The record was always there. Someone had to be willing to look at it. Ray nodded once. Fair enough. The contractor never came back. 2 days later, I received a copy of the cancellation notice sent to his company. Cedar Hollow Estates HOA is canceling all work related to the proposed rear access improvement pending legal review. No work is authorized on or near Lot 18. The contractor's company sent the HOA an invoice for mobilization, layout time, and canceled scheduling. They did not send it to me. That detail felt small, but after everything that had happened, small things mattered. The orange HOA flags stayed in my grass for 1 more day because I wanted everything photographed before anything moved. Then, with Ray's note in my file and the attorney's email printed twice, I called the management company and asked how they wanted their markings removed. April answered. Her voice sounded tired. Mr. McKinney, you may remove any temporary HOA markers from your parcel. I'll send that in writing, please do. 3 minutes later, the email arrived. I printed it. Then I walked outside, put on my work gloves, and pulled the first orange flag out of the ground. It came up easily. Too easily for something that had caused that much trouble. I pulled the second, then the third. When I reached the one nearest the dogwoods, I stopped for a moment. The white word remove had already started fading from the grass, but I'll see it decent. I stood there, thinking about Ellen, about muddy shoes, about crooked trees, about Marlene, calling them plantings, barriers, personal landscaping. Then I pulled the flag and set it with the others. I did not throw them. I did not stomp on them. I put them in a neat bundle, took one final picture, and laid them beside the garage for the HOA to collect. Ellen used to say anger makes a mess and proof cleans one up. That week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. This time, the notice was sent properly. The agenda was specific: legal review of Lot 18 access matter, vendor authorization procedures, fine approval procedure, records preservation, board leadership. Marlene's name was not in the agenda. It did not need to be. By Wednesday night, Janet Mills called me. "I thought you should hear it before the rumor mill gets hold of it," she said. I was standing in the kitchen, wiping down the same table where the whole case file had been stacked. "What happened?" "Marlene resigned as president for a few seconds." I said nothing. Then I asked, "Resigned or removed?" Janet exhaled. "Resigned before the no confidence vote that sounded like Marlene. Leave. Before the room could officially say what everyone already knew." Janet continued. "She said she acted in the best interest of community safety and did not want to be a distraction." "A distraction, I know. Did she apologize?" Janet was quiet. "No, not to the room. I looked through the window at the dogwoods. Then she did not resign because she was sorry." "No," Janet said. "She resigned because nobody would second her motions anymore." That was justice of a different kind. Not handcuffs, not sirens, not some dramatic scene where the sheriff dragged her out of the community center. Just a woman who had built her power on people being too tired, too embarrassed, or too intimidated to ask questions, suddenly sitting in a room where no one would carry her clipboard for her. The following Friday, the board held a short public meeting to accept her resignation and appoint an interim president. I did not plan to speak. I sat near the back with Ellen's blue binder on my lap, the same way I had at the hearing. Marlene was not there. Her chair at the board table was empty. For 3 years, that chair had been her throne. She had used it to lecture people about mulch, mailboxes, trash cans, fence stains, and whatever else she thought made her sound important. Now it was just a folding chair behind a plastic table. Kevin cleared his throat and read the resignation into the record. Then he said, "I move that the board accept Marlene Briggs' resignation as president of Cedar Hollow Estates HOA." Janet seconded. The vote passed, and then came the part I will remember longer than the vote. No one thanked her for her service. Not Kevin, not Janet, not the treasurer, not the residents. Not one person. The room simply voted, recorded the result, and moved on. That was the sound of power disappearing. Not a shout, not applause, not revenge. Just a room full of people deciding that the person who used to scare them no longer deserved a speech. The new interim president was Janet Mills. Her first motion was not about access roads. It was not about fines. It was not about punishing me or protecting Marlene's reputation. It was to freeze all enforcement related to unverified access claims until council completed review. Kevin seconded it. It passed unanimously. Then a man in the second row raised his hand. "Does that mean we can ask for proof on old fines?" Janet looked at Thomas Keene, who sat near the wall with a folder in his lap. Thomas nodded. Janet turned back to the room. "Yes," she said. "Residents may request the records supporting prior enforcement actions." For a second, nobody spoke. Then hands started going up, one after another. A woman asked about a 300 shed fine. A retired man asked about a drainage access notice behind his lot. Paul Denner asked whether safety project claims required recorded documents. Mrs. Alvarez asked whether appeal hearings had to happen before fines became final. The room that had once looked at me like I was. The problem was now asking the questions. Marlene had trained them not to ask. And I will tell you something that felt bigger than winning my own dispute. Because once people learn they are allowed to ask for proof, they do not go back to being quiet as easily. The next community-wide letter came out 3 days later. Residents, following legal review, the board confirms that the proposed rear access road will not proceed. The association has not identified recorded road access rights across Lot 18. All enforcement related to that matter has been withdrawn. Effective immediately, Cedar Hollow Estates HOA will implement the following procedures. No property access claim may be asserted without recorded supporting documentation. No project involving entry onto private property may proceed without a signed board resolution and council review. No fines may be issued without documented covenant authority and 2 authorized signatures. No removal of fencing, trees, landscaping, or structures may be threatened without legal review. All board votes must reflect notice, quorum, motion second, vote count, and minutes. All residents may request records through the management office. I read that list slowly. That was bigger than my fence, bigger than the dogwoods. Because now every homeowner in Cedar Hollow had something Marlene never wanted them to have. A process, a record, a way to ask, "Show me where it says that." The comments in the neighborhood Facebook group changed fast. Some people deleted their old posts, some edited them. Some acted like they had never believed Marlene in the first place, but not everyone hid. Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door Saturday morning with a small lemon cake wrapped in foil. She looked embarrassed standing on my porch. I should not have looked away from you when that notice was on your door, she said. I shook my head. You did not put it there. No, she said, but I let her make me think it meant something before you had a chance to speak. That was more honest than most people manage. I accepted the cake. Thank you. Paul Denner came by later that afternoon. He did not bring cake. That would have been strange. He stood at the edge of my driveway with both hands in his jacket pockets, staring toward the back of the house. I was wrong, we said. I waited. He looked at me about the ambulance comment, about the trees, about all of it. I nodded. He cleared his throat. My wife told me if somebody tried to mark our yard for a road, and I called her garden just flowers, I'd be sleeping in the garage. Despite myself, I smiled. Smart woman. Smarter than me, he said. Then he added, I asked the management company for my fine records from last year. That got my attention. What did they say? They said I have the right to request them. I nodded slowly. Good. Paul looked uncomfortable again. You think she did this to other people? I thought about the room after the camera clip. The questions, the faces, the way the issue stopped being just my land, the moment people wondered whether their own fines had been handled the same way. I think people should check their records, I said. That was the safest answer, and the truest. Over the next few weeks, Cedar Hollow changed in a way I had never seen before. Not overnight. Neighborhoods do not heal that fast. But people started asking different questions. At meetings, residents asked for motion numbers. They asked whether a vote had quorum. They asked whether fines were tied to specific covenant sections. They asked whether common area actually meant common area, or just something someone had always assumed. One man asked for the recorded easement behind his lot. A woman asked why her appeal had been denied before the hearing date. Another resident asked why Marlene had been allowed to approve vendor work without a second board signature. That was when the board ordered an internal audit, not a criminal investigation, not a public spectacle. A records audit. Thomas Keene recommended it. Kevin supported it. Janet seconded it. The audit reviewed 2 years of fines, vendor approvals, and access-related notices. The results came back quietly, but not harmlessly. Several fines were refunded. 2 vendor invoices were flagged for missing authorization. 3 violation letters were withdrawn because the cited covenant sections did not match the alleged offense. And the old rear access improvement folder was closed permanently. No road, no gravel, no tree removal, no emergency corridor through Lot 18. Marlene did not attend the next annual meeting. Her white SUV stayed in the driveway. Her curtains stayed closed. A month later, a small for sale sign appeared in her yard. People talked, of course. People always talk. Some said she was moving closer to her daughter. Some said she could not stand living in a neighborhood where everyone had watched her lose control of a microphone. Some said the legal bills had scared her. I did not know which was true, and I did not care enough to ask. The important thing was what did not move. My fence did not move. My property line did not move. The dogwoods did not move in April. The blossoms opened. White, crooked, stubborn things. I stood under them one morning, with a cup of coffee, watching the light catch on the petals. The ground where remove had been painted was green again. You could not see the word anymore, but I remembered where it had been. That is the thing about property disputes. Even when the paint fades, you remember the feeling of seeing someone else's claim written on your land. Ray Hollis came by that week to drop off the final survey packet. Denise from the county office had already mailed the certified copies I requested. Janet sent me the adopted policy changes from the board minutes. I put all of it in Ellen's blue binder. Then I added one more label to the inside pocket, Lot 18 access dispute resolved. A few days later, Janet called and asked if the board could install a small sign near the maintenance lane. Not on my property, but facing the common side. I asked what it would say. She emailed me the wording. Private property beyond this point. No HOA access without recorded legal authority. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I replied with one word: approved. The sign went up. The next week. Small plain. No drama. But every time I saw it, I thought about Marlene standing in her cream blazer saying, everything is a project once the board approves it. She had been wrong. Some things are not projects. Some things are promises. Some things are boundaries. Some things belong to a family because a deed says so. A survey confirms it, and the people who loved that land held onto it when someone else tried to make them feel selfish for saying no. The last envelope came from the HOA treasurer. Inside was a reimbursement check, certified records, surveyor fee, attorney consultation, printing costs, every dollar documented, every dollar paid. I endorsed the check, deposited it, and used part of it to buy 7 small bags of mulch for the dogwoods. Not because they needed it, because I wanted to. That Saturday morning, I spread the mulch by hand slowly, carefully, one tree at a time. Paul walked by and raised a hand. Mrs. Alvarez waved from across the street. Janet stopped near the lane, saw the trees, and smiled without saying anything. For the first time in weeks, nobody slowed down to inspect my yard. Nobody took pictures. Nobody whispered about emergency access. Nobody called my wife's trees plantings. It was just my backyard again. Quiet, crooked mine. And if there is one thing I learned from all of it, it is this. A clipboard can scare people. A Facebook post can turn neighbors against you. A Washington Post can make an honest man feel like he has done something wrong. But none of those things move a property line. Marlene thought authority was being the loudest person in the room. She thought if she said emergency enough times, people would stop asking for proof. She thought an old planning map, a few orange flags, and a daily fine could do what no recorded easement ever had. But county records do not care who smiles the loudest in an HOA meeting. They do not care who has the clipboard. They do not care who controls the microphone. They only care what was recorded. And on the day Marlene tried to claim my private land for a road, the record was waiting quietly in a county office, exactly where it had always been. All I had to do was go get it, so if an HOA, a neighbor, or anybody with a title ever points at your fence and tells you your land is not really yours, do not start by yelling. Start by documenting. Ask for the deed, ask for the plat, ask for the easement, ask for the book, page, and instrument number, because sometimes justice does not arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives in a manila envelope with a county stamp, and sometimes that is enough to stop a road cold.